Welcome, heroes and villains, to the Fjook Enterprises YouTube channel. As always, I'm your host Fjook, and today we're doing another conversation with Fjook on my quest to interview all the game masters that I know. As in the last ones, I'm going to let the person I'm interviewing introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Dave. I've been a friend of Fjook's for a long time, and I am what you might call a forever DM. I've been DMing for over, I guess it would be 20 years now. Or not DMing, I guess. I've been playing D&D and other tabletop games for about 20 years now, 19, I think. And I've been a DM for probably 14 or 15 of those years, almost consistently. I can probably count how many times I've been a player again on on my one hand.
What systems have you played?
All the systems that I've used over the years. So when I first started getting into tabletop RPGs, the group I was playing with, they were kind of just finishing up a campaign in second edition. So I got to join that as a way to kind of learn how the game worked, not specifically the mechanics of second edition, but just sort of how tabletop RPGs worked. And I did get to play a little bit. And then shortly after that campaign ended, we all kind of got into third edition. So it was new for the DM at the time, and it was new for all of us as players. Even the old returning players, it was new for them. So third edition, I kind of dabbled into second a little bit. 3.5, obviously, when it came out, was kind of the primary one that we played, and played for a very long time. I also played a lot of Alternity, which I don't know if a lot of people know about, but it's a sci-fi version of a tabletop game, and it uses, I'm not entirely sure if that's what it's called, but we always refer to it as a reverse D20 system. You actually want lower numbers. The lower your number, the better on your skill checks, ability checks, pretty much everything other than damage. And it had a much more detailed and farther expanding skill tree, which we all thought was really cool. It had rules in it actually for playing a non-sci-fi game. If you wanted to play a more of a fantasy game, it had rules for kind of converting some of the tech into magic and a lot of the weapons into. It had access to Stone Age and medieval weapons and stuff like that, and it had rules on kind of expanding on them to make them a little bit more diverse. So that was pretty cool. I really liked that game, and I think Alternity is probably still one of my favorite systems. After Alternity came out, we definitely dove into 4th edition D&D for a while, but none of us, even the new people that I was playing with at that time, none of us really liked it that much. It was too different, I think, from what we were used to. So the games were still fun because we were always getting together to play them. The mechanics and the way that the rules worked, we just didn't really agree with. So when Pathfinder came out, we all dove into that. It was basically 3.5, kind of amped up a bit, and that was much more our speed. That was much more familiar to us, and we enjoyed that system a lot more. It allowed for a lot of flexibility and versatility, and some pretty overpowered characters, which caused problems and a lot of fun for us. So we played that for a long time, kind of bouncing back and forth between that and Alternity. I played Exalted, which is a White Wolf game. Uses a D10. You play as a demigod of the sun, the moon, stars, dragon-blooded, all sorts of stuff. And it's a really much more heavy focused on the storytelling aspect instead of like mechanics. So there's a lot more things that you can do. Pretty much, if you can describe it, it is not completely idiotic. Even if it is completely idiotic, actually, you can do it because of the vagueness of some of the skills and the abilities that you have. Kind of allows for that sort of flexibility. And it was a lot of fun to play literal demigods and power up throughout the system. I played Scion, which is another game that you get to play as demigods, but more like Earth-based ones, so like the Greek pantheon, the Japanese pantheon, whatever it's called, Norse pantheon. You play demigods of them, and you start off as a hero, which is sort of like a superpowered human. And then as you gain renown and experience throughout the game, you level up. The more people that kind of know about you and believe in your ideologies or your well, just you as a thing that exists, the more powerful you become, until eventually you can become an actual god and then go and kind of fight alongside the other gods in this like galactic pantheon war thing that they're doing. That was a lot of fun. Really, really overpowered. It was really hard to control the mechanics. Like just the feats that you could do in that game were absolutely nuts and really, really hard to balance. A lot of fun, but mechanically extremely difficult to balance. And I never DM'd that system either. I got to play in that for a while. Other than that, I played a bunch of other White Wolf games, Vampire the Masquerade, both versions of Mage. I believe there's 2 different versions of Mage, and we got to play both of them. Also really, really versatile game. I DM'd a bunch of those games as well. Werewolf. I don't think I ever DM'd any Werewolf games. I believe that was all my buddy. And then, obviously, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, when it came out, it took kind of every bit of mechanics that all the best parts of D&D that I liked, it brought them out there, and then it simplified everything. I was getting really tired of the number build of all the numbers getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and all the different math and feats and abilities and stuff that you had to. So it simplified that a lot, and I really liked it. Some of my friends don't like it, but I really like it. So I have a lot more fun DMing that game because it puts a lot more focus on balancing the characters and having, I'm gonna arguably say, simpler abilities, but ones that are a little bit less complicated. So that's a lot more fun for me to DM. And just recently, I got to play in a Pathfinder 2 campaign. That was also a lot of fun. Pathfinder 2 is kind of the opposite. It takes Pathfinder and it simplifies it, so the numbers are a lot smaller, but it allows for a lot more of that versatility and flexibility in your character building. Everything is broken down into feats, which makes each of your characters a lot more unique from the others, although arguably some feats are drastically better than others. So in some instances, I would find that there's no real comparison. Like there's no real reason to take some feats over another, which was kind of sad. Yeah, I guess that was it. Actually, that's the entire list of all the different games that I've played. Oh no, I have played in some other minor other games. Really briefly though, like GURPS and Anima. We played D20 Modern. We played the Dragon Ball Z D6 game, and that was hilarious. But those are all really minor games that we kind of touched on. We got to sample a little bit, and then went back to our normal games and systems that we enjoyed more.
How did you get into role-playing games?
So I had briefly mentioned the group of people that I first started playing with, the group of people that I first kind of got into tabletop RPGs. At the time, I was 13 or 14 years old, and they were like 18 to 20. And we met them at this place in town called Pockets. which was it was a pool bar. After 7 o'clock, we weren't allowed in there, but a lot of people would gather there after school and sit down and use the tables and use the space to kind of sit down and play Magic the Gathering, or at the time, I didn't really know what it was, but it was D&D and other card games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and all that kind of shit. So I met them there, and after a little while, I got invited to one of the games. So they were the ones that kind of brought us in. And I will admit, it was a little bit weird to be like a 14-year-old playing with a group of like 18 to 20-year-olds, because I would go to one of their guys' place on like a Friday night, and we would sit down from like 6 o'clock till like 11 or 12 o'clock at night and play D&D, and then they would drive me home. But it was a lot of fun. I'm glad that they kind of brought me in and taught me about the game. I played with them as a player for probably 3 years, I think, before they all eventually kind of moved away or moved on, went to college and moved to the city and what's not. And I never really kept in contact with all of them. There was one guy I kind of kept in contact with. He would occasionally come back to town. And then after that, I became the DM for my kind of local group of friends, because none of them really knew how to play. And I've always kind of been a storyteller as I ramble on with my story here. But so it was just sort of a natural fit for me. And I kind of quickly learned that I like being the DM more than a player, I think. I don't get to play very often. And I think now being a DM has kind of ruined that for me, because when I do get to play, I'm constantly not second guessing things, but I'm constantly trying to like analyze what's going on and like how they got to that conclusion and what all the plot hooks might be, so that I can try and work with the DM more, I guess. But it's still fun when I get to play. It's just not that often.
So I guess I can skip the question of how you went from being a player to being a GM, because you kind of answered that.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to keep playing, and nobody else really knew enough about the game to even attempt to be a DM at the time. Like, nobody felt comfortable, so it was just sort of a natural transition, I guess.
Now that you've listed all the systems you've played, are there any systems you refuse to run?
There's a bunch of systems I refuse to run, actually. Anima is extremely complicated, and even though I kind of know how it works, I really don't think I would ever want to run a game like that. I pretty much refuse to run most of the White Wolf games, like Vampire, Mage, Werewolf, and stuff. Mostly because it's not my jam. Like, I'm not really into that kind of dark monster fantasy thing. So, if I did run it, like the couple times that I have run it, I just didn't really like it. So now I don't want to do it. I won't ever do it again. I don't think I would ever really want to go back to DM older editions of D&D, like second, third, especially fourth, because I just didn't like fourth. There's a lot of things in fourth that I do like. Some things about that were in fourth I like, but for the most part, it's just not. It's just not my jam.
Are there any systems that you enjoy running?
5th edition D&D I really enjoy running. The main reason is because it's just really simple. I find it much easier to like balance encounters. Like the challenge rating system in D&D has always been really wonky. And I, especially in my early years, I always found it really hard to balance encounters out. Like, for instance, I put my players in one campaign. I started them at level 3. So this is like session 1 or maybe session 2. And I had an ancient red dragon attack this town. And one of them got a lucky shot and managed to stun lock the dragon. And they all came up and basically just like poked it to death, because they could only do like 1 damage to it. So they managed to kill an ancient red dragon, a group of like third level, like a bunch of 5 level 3 characters managed to kill it because at the time I didn't really know how to say no as a DM. And when I did say no, my players would get really, really ornery with me. So that happened. And then one time I managed to kill the entire party with a kobold, like just a cookie cutter kobold. It snuck into their rooms at night, and they got into a fight, and they just, for whatever reason, couldn't hit the thing. It could hit them. I knocked them all out, almost wiped the party. So stuff like that, like for whatever reason, I found it really difficult to balance. So 5th, I find really easy to balance encounters with the exploration and skill checks and stuff like that, and the advantage and disadvantage system I really, really like. The proficiency and the expertise, super easy to manage, really fun to use. It's really easy to learn. So 5th is by far my favorite edition for D&D, and probably my favorite system now.
Are there any moments of the players completely surprising you that come to your memory at this time?
There's lots. There's lots of moments where the players surprise me, mostly because my DMing style I would refer to as like a sandbox. I don't do a lot of planning. I don't do a lot of note taking and stuff, mostly because my players would, when I would build something for them, they would completely and like almost purposefully refuse to follow it or like play along with the story. So they would just sort of go off and do their own thing. And no matter what I did, it didn't really matter because all the work I would put in, they would completely ignore. And when I would try and kind of railroad or guide them back to the story, they would get angry with me. If you're wondering, I recently learned that if you look at the top 5 stereotypical worst people to play with, that was pretty much my play group growing up for like 10 years. I still had lots of fun, but they all had the like traits and quirks that made them like really difficult to play with. And I hadn't learned because I had never really played with anybody else up until recently. Not to rag on them or anything, but that's what would happen all the time. So I never planned anything. So they were constantly surprising me all the time. One particular memory that comes to mind would have to be when they decided to play totally different characters than what they normally would play. For instance, I had a person who would no matter what class or race combination he would always play a character that had like maxed out strength, maxed out constitution, and he just wanted to run around hitting people as hard as he possibly could. And he was like as thick as a fucking, like he was just dumb, like just a bag of hammers. Had more intelligence than this character. But he absolutely refused to play a barbarian. Like he just thought they were boring. So imagine a wizard that basically can't cast spells and was running around punching people and being really, really surprised when he was constantly being floored. Or a rogue that didn't know how to sneak around or pick locks or do literally anything that was roguish other than run up and punch people. Not stab them with a knife. Not hit them with like a bow. Punch people. And each of the players had a character type that they played all the time, and they kind of refused to play anything different. They would make the same characters over and over again with the same names or slightly different names, or they would try out different races and classes, but they would always play the same style. Like they just had a different set of skills, sometimes skills that they never even used. So there was one time where they actually played the characters I had made them for them. I was like, here, these are the characters you should play based on your play style, because they played them. And I was really surprised because I wasn't actually that surprised, I suppose, but they really liked those characters. And that moment kind of got them to try out different things. So that is what was surprising to me. They actually started playing different characters with totally different play styles and different personalities. And but yeah, I guess that's kind of the most the biggest surprise I've ever had. There's so many like instances in the games themselves that have been surprising. I would there be no way that I could list them all.
Do you have any fond memories of everything going according to plan?
And I guess this is also a time when the players surprised me. I've attempted multiple games online. The very first one I ever did was with a group of new players. Most of them were new. I had like 2 returning players, maybe, and like 3 new players. And I did it online because there was no other way to play. And I had never done it before. And I can't remember what I think we were. I don't remember the program that we were using. But one of the other players had used it before. She had given me access to a bunch of macros and programming codes and stuff like that to kind of set up abilities and classes and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't anything. This was long before like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds and stuff like that. But so we got it all set up, and I had set up a game specifically based around the 3 new players' backstories. They had all made characters together, which was also surprising. We had a session 0 that actually went according to plan. And they all made characters that worked with each other and kind of around each other, that could be friends, which a lot of my older players never did. They always make characters by themselves and then be really surprised that there were other players or characters in the game that were stepping on their toes, or they didn't like him, or they just wouldn't party up with them, kind of thing. So, but that campaign, the thing about that campaign that was the most surprising is, 1, I actually finished that story. They went from level 1 to level 11, and that story ended. And 2, it heavily involved time travel, where I would set up events in early games that were confusing, or the players didn't really understand how certain things would happen. And then in later games, it would be revealed to them, and they would not exactly go, like, they didn't know what the story was, but they understood where it was going, like what direction the game was going in, and they wanted to play along with it. They wanted the story to happen. They didn't try and run off and become gods, or, go murder a blacksmith so that they could steal his socks, which are events that happened in my old games. But they kind of went along with it, and they stumbled, I would say, or I did really well. Maybe I just was really good at planning it out. They made sure that those events that were supposed to happen happened, so that the time stream was a stabilized loop. They went back in time at one point and caused a bunch of events that would eventually happen in the future. Some that I had planned, and some that I actually didn't plan, but just made perfect sense. At one point, they went far into the future, and did a bunch of stuff. They ended up going back in time and taking an item that they had lost, and were on a quest to try and find. And then they found out that it was them that took it. They went back in time to take this item so that they would have access to it. So, despite I hear it about it all the time online. Like, time travel is really, really hard to do in a game, and especially in like D&D. Because there's so many variables and there's so many players that want to go in different directions and do different things. So it's very, very difficult to plan. I've tried to do it again, and it doesn't work. It hasn't worked as well. But that one time, the stars aligned and everything just like went absolutely perfectly. The players worked well together. The game went really smoothly. The story went perfectly. It was just perfect. And it set me up for about a dozen other attempts at playing online that went absolutely tits up, ass backwards. So it put me into this false sense of security about online gaming. But that campaign, which I called the I think I called it Phoenix Rising or the Phoenix Gate or something like that. It went absolutely perfectly, like unbelievably smoothly and perfectly. So that's, and I've never had a game do that. I've never had players work that cohesively together. It was just magic, pure magic.
So I have to ask this question. It's not on the list, but I have to ask this question now. Was I one of those problem players from way back when?
No, God, no. So when we did play together, you and I, your characters, I've come to learn that there's two types of, I'm going to call them chaos characters. There's good chaos characters, which do things that are unexpected, and maybe a little bit out there, or even just like weird, like just it's just weird, right? They're chaotic, but they're chaotic in a sense that they don't take away from the game. They're not abruptly stopping the game. They're not causing problems for all the other players. They're adding to the story with their chaos. So like you and Brad were definitely chaos players, and you weren't problematic because you never derailed the story with what you were doing. Your characters might have been crazy, but they were fun, right? And like Brad's characters, Brad's entire gaming history is full of chaos characters that have just caused unbelievable amounts of mischief, either purposefully or completely accidentally. And for whatever reason, he's never really, maybe once or twice, never really derailed the game. So like you and him have that same kind of play style. I don't know if it's on purpose or if it's an accident, but that's just how it goes. So you were never a derailing chaotic character. Whereas like, for the most part, Mike's characters were chaotic and derailing. He would kind of take the game and go off in a totally different direction than what I would plan, or what the party wanted to do. And he was just sort of commanding about it. Not like in a negative way exactly, but he just, like Mike's got that sense of presence. He's got that aura about him, I guess, the charisma, where he would sort of take charge. And in a lot of instances, that was a really good thing. We needed that extra direction, especially in my earlier days of storytelling. I needed a player to kind of help take charge. But a lot of the time, his characters would cause mischief in a way that would be problematic. Your brother, a couple instances comes to mind where his characters were problematic chaos characters. So, yeah, you were never a problem player. Chaotic, yes. Unpredictable sometimes, but no, nothing I would consider particularly problematic.
That's the last question. Any advice to fellow game masters out there?
My biggest piece of advice that I give to people that are planning on DMing is specifically like, do not do what I do when it comes to planning. And that said, I mean, like, you have to sit down and plan out your games. It's a really beneficial to be able to pull stuff kind of out of your ass at the moment. You have to be a good DM, to be a great DM, you have to be able to do that. But you also need to be able to sit down and plot out a story. It doesn't need to be a novel, but you need to have a skeleton, some sort of concrete piece of like a guide, a plan that you can refer back to, at the very least, as like a point form list of things that need to happen or you want to happen, to make sure to make things go as smoothly as they can. Without that plan, you're you're just asking for things to get derailed or go completely backwards. Like, it's just my entire DMing career. In my early days, I did do planning, and I mentioned that. Like, I would plan things out. Sometimes I would have pages of notes and like descriptions for describing scenes, and when players would like enter a dungeon or come across something, whimsical or terrifying. But then the players sort of, and I didn't know how to say no, and I didn't know how to properly guide players then either using that plan, and things would just kind of go off the rails. So now, now I'm older and a little bit wiser and I'm much more experienced, I have a sandbox that I play in. So I have a world that I have the players play in, and I know everything about it. It's all in my head. But I still put a lot of that on paper. I don't need it. Like I said, I don't need a novel, but even just having a point form list, here's the beginning of the story. This is what I want to happen. Here's an event in the story. I need to get the players here somehow. No matter what direction they go off in, this thing has to happen for the story to progress. And then they can branch off and do side quests or go and do whatever the heck they want. Kind of in the middle, right? Flexibility in the middle and being able to pull stuff kind of out of the hat enhances that. But that's my biggest advice is to definitely have a plan and a structure that you can refer back to make sure that things are staying on track. Because as much as D&D is definitely a group storytelling thing, so everybody should be involved in the story, not just the DM. The players are part of it as well. They can describe their own actions. They have backstories that they want to involve in the story, in the game. Even if you're playing a cookie, not cookie cutter game, but like a pre-made campaign like Storm King's Thunder or Ravenloft in D&D, you have that structure, but the players are kind of filling in all the gaps. They're making the story just as much as, if not more so, than the DM is. But that structure that you can refer back to, that framework is probably the most important thing about being a DM that I can think of.
As always, do the typical YouTube things. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.